Welcome back to Great Day. You know, it's easy to look at the ugly side of the pandemic, the losses and the loneliness and the lockdowns, but in the midst of all the bad, there was a little bit of good that came out of it as well. So what lessons and gifts can we take away from the last 2 years? Developmental and behavioral pediatrician Dr. Tim Jordan joins us this morning to explain. Always love to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about, once the storm is over, you don't remember how you made it through and how you managed to survive. But there's apparently some good that comes from this. Yeah. So tell us about what we can, because I'd like to write it down and remind myself occasionally.
And journaling, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But
okay.
I think we're far enough along in the pandemic to be able to step out, kind of zoom out and say, what have I learned about myself, about life? I think it's good to ask your kids these kinds of questions, like how have you grown in the last 2 years? What have you learned about overcoming adversity? What have you learned about handling all the losses that you've had? What have you learned about structuring yourself with your schoolwork, because it was so weird, you know, virtual home, school, back and forth. What have you learned about taking care of yourself? What are some of the habits or activities you've learned to do to help yourself feel better, to cope? What have you learned to do to maintain your relationships? Those are all lessons they've learned through COVID that can be applicable to any challenge or adversity down the road.
Life is different now, and you're saying what have you learned about yourself, I guess? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? Maybe that's a good takeaway, is that I know I need to be better at this, but I also know I'm pretty darn good at that, because who would have thought that I could get through this like as well as I have? Right.
Ann and I were in Mexico 2 weeks ago running a family retreat. We had 34 dads and their either son or daughters, and one of the things we had them do together, the pair, was to talk about what are the gifts that you received from the pandemic so far. And they talked about, we've had more time with our family. We've been playing more board games. We've been spending more time outside in nature. There are gifts that they can also focus on that they've learned about relationships, about, have you learned to handle your boredom? Have you learned how to be alone? Have you learned how to play an instrument? I've had a lot of kids doing more arts and crafts. I had a girl in my office recently who had crocheted these 2 huge blankets. So they've used their time. So they've learned something about themselves. They've learned to maybe a new activity, a new interest, a new passion. So if you focus on the lessons, if you focus on the gifts, maybe spend some time, you mentioned the word writing, journaling about what you learned. So you remember, you kind of internalize it. Those are things they can carry forward with them for the rest of their lives.
And is that a good time then, if you do talk about what are the good things that you think we may have brought away from this, is that a good time to bring up maybe what are some of the weaknesses that we've also discovered, and maybe we need to work on those things?
There may be some things you've learned. You know, I have a deficit there. Maybe I could learn to work more on handling my alone time. A lot of kids today have a hard time being alone and quiet. Yeah. Because they just pull out their devices. So hopefully they've learned to handle their alone boredom time with things other than just YouTube videos and social media, which many kids have. I've talked to lots of girls who I counsel who are doing more arts and crafts and more painting and drawing and knitting and crocheting and some service work, or starting businesses online. They've used that time they've had actually to be productive, which is a good thing.
And it's a good thing to remind them that a lot of these coping mechanisms and skills that they've learned during this time will be good when there's other adversities down the road, that we can use those skills.
Right, so family at meal times, bring it up to your consciousness. What have you learned? What are the lessons? What are the gifts?
You're a better cook now than we used to be, maybe.
I'm smelling it over there.
That was, man, that's good stuff. Thank you, Dr. Jordan. Check out Dr. Tim Jordan's blog for more parenting tips, and there are some great ones on there. We will also post this segment on KMOV.com/greatday following the show.
Always good advice.
Yes, always.
Guys, thank you.